To finish off, let's take a few minutes to consider some of the new developments in purchasing. As a result of developments in the business context, purchasing strategies and structures in industrial companies in particular have undergone major changes. And there's a few examples which I want to discuss in the next couple of slides. Firstly, what we see is that the world has changed from being a seller's market to a buyer's market. Particularly in the case of industrial goods and so on, there is an overcapacity of supply. So years ago, if you wanted a particular tool or a particular item of equipment, you may have been restricted to just a few vendors or a few manufacturers, and then they could inflate their prices accordingly. However, these days, with the global market and the global economy, consumers are absolutely spoiled for choice, and so it's changed from being a seller's market to a buyer's market. Consequently, we find an increasing pressure on sales prices and margins. Now, a few other things which are tied up with that. Firstly, we're seeing what we call leveraged purchasing and supplier strategies, that is, economies of scale. So we find that important purchasing advantages can be found by combining joint purchasing requirements across different plants of one company. So going back to my automotive example, if you're using common components across different vehicles, the number of components which you can buy in one order is so much greater. It gives you that much more bargaining power. Next, of course, is global sourcing. And we find that components, parts, materials, and even services are increasingly sourced from other parts of the world which provide lower costs and often better service. So global sourcing is something that has really taken off since late 90s or so. What we're also finding is increased integration with suppliers. So years ago, supplier, it was very much an us and them mentality. The purchasing, the engineers or whoever the customers were would work on the specification, give it to the procurement department, who would then hand it over to the suppliers, who would then provide quotes. These days, however, we find increased integration with suppliers. What we're finding is that the supplier is becoming part of your own organization. Your IT structures are across from the supplier to you. So you're working closely together, and even as it's pointed out in the next point, we have early supplier involvement in new product development. So suppliers are brought on board much earlier in the product life cycle than they were in the past, and we'll talk more about that in lectures to come. Lastly, there are points of reciprocity agreements. Excuse me, I can't pronounce that complicated word. But what does that actually mean? Well, what we find is that these sort of agreements and compensation obligations are often being put in place. What this means is that companies operating on the international market are often obliged to compensate, if you like, part of their sales turnover by counter trade obligations and agreements. So it's very much, we'll buy your product, but we expect you to buy some of our product. Lastly, and this is lastly, we also find a new interest in corporate social responsibility and business integrity. We find that consumers and indeed national governments have become stricter in their regulations for environmentally friendly products like packaging, things like that, and also issues like child labor, for example, has become a major issue of concern to many companies. Similarly, environmental impact, if a company becomes known for destroying its local environment, governments and indeed consumers are going to be far less enthusiastic about dealing with them. So I hope that through this lecture you can see the importance of procurement to a business and the different things which you may find yourself procuring, and some of the new developments involved. In short, purchasing and procurement represents a business area which has been confronted with lots of changes and challenges. As the way companies work together changes, the procurement process is changing with it, and if you're part of a procurement department, you need to be open to these changes and indeed leading the way. Moreover, with the global market and other challenges, purchasing and supply chain management becomes more in the spotlight of business. If that is not done well, if that is not done properly, then the business's ability to operate and to compete may be compromised. Thank you.